Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about the factory design pattern using JavaScript. The factory pattern, or simple factory, is a creational design pattern that encapsulates the instantiation of objects. It's fairly simple to employ and really easy to code for. The factory class will never be instantiated, meaning it will behave like a static class, and it will only have one static method that will house all the code that would actually do the instantiation of your objects. So let's get started on that. I'm going to do class, and we'll call it aircraft factory. Aircraft factory. And what this class will do, it'll handle all the instantiation of objects that are related to aircraft. So curly brace, and we need our constructor. Again, we're not going to instantiate this, so there's really no point of putting code in there. And we need one static method. So static, we'll call it create aircraft, and it's going to need an argument. We'll call it type in curly brace. The purpose of this method is to contain all the code that is necessary to instantiate your aircraft. So you're going to need some conditionals in here, and based off the argument type, that is what is going to determine what type of aircraft that this factory is going to instantiate. If you give it the type jet, this factory will instantiate the jet and return it. So that's what we're doing here. Why don't we go ahead and copy and paste this and do a couple of other airplane types or aircraft types. So why don't we do helicopter, and one more, what's another aircraft? A UFO. Why not? So UFO. So helicopter, we'll do a new heli. And for UFO, we'll just see a new UFO. So as of now, these are the three and only three aircraft that this factory can produce. What I also want to add to this conditional is throw an error if you try to create an aircraft that this factory doesn't know how to create. So before I add that else, let me change these to else ifs. So else if, and then our else here, I'm going to write the code that will throw the error message in the browser. So let's throw and some custom error message. I don't know how to create a, and when we concatenate what you asked for it to create, which is type, and maybe some exclamation marks. Alright, so let's go ahead and test this out. Actually, let me change this to a capital H because you remember naming conventions. The first letter of a class file is always capitalized. And speaking of class files, I don't even have jet, heli, and UFO created yet, so I'm going to make another JavaScript file that will contain all three of those classes. So I'll do a new JavaScript file. I'll just call this concrete classes. And remember, concrete classes are classes that you instantiate, not an abstract class. So I'll just call it that. We don't need that up there. And let's do the class heli, I think was one of them. And we need our constructor in here. Let's see what I say. Console log. Helicopter created, just to do our confirmation. I'm getting an error or warning here because WebStorm is not using the ES6 interpreter, it's still using ES5. So I need to go ahead and change that. So I'm going to go to my preferences, and that will be under language and frameworks. We click JavaScript, and notice that it says 5.1. Nope, we want ECMAScript 6. Hit OK. We don't need anything about Babel right now, so let's dismiss that. Close that out. Okay, so notice the red squiggly is gone, and now it's just giving me a spelling issue. It doesn't know that word, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this class file. So we have a total of 3 classes. We have our heli already. Let's make this one jet, I believe. And UFO was the other one. So we have heli, jet, and UFO. Let me go ahead and change the console log here to show the right thing. Oops. So class heli, console log helicopter created. Class jet, console log jet created. Class UFO, console log UFO created. Okay, so we have our class files in place. Let's go back to our factory. There's jet, heli, and UFO. So everything seems to be okay. Now what I want to do next is go ahead and load these two JS files in our HTML. So we have factory, we have concrete, and we have main. So we're going to have a total as of now 3 JavaScript files. So let's make sure index.html is reflecting that. Right now we have nothing. So the one with the least dependencies will be the concrete classes. So I'm going to go ahead and load that first. Script, and we'll call it concrete classes.js. And I'll go ahead and copy and paste this. The next one I want to load is the factory, because that has dependencies. For the factory.js file to work, for that class to work, it's going to need to know the concrete classes. So that's why we have to load those first. So the first script we're loading is the concrete classes.js and the factory, and then finally the main.js. Let's go ahead and tab this stuff to give it a little more structure to our HTML. Now I'm going to go to the main and put a console log in here just to make sure everything is loading correctly. So main loaded. And let's actually run this. So I can do much, but it does say main loaded, so at least everything seems to be okay so far. So I'm going to go back to the main here and actually use this factory or aircraft factory that we just created earlier. So go back to WebStorm. Now remember, when using the factory pattern, you're not going to instantiate the factory. So you're not going to do something like this. Factory equals new aircraft factory. That is not how you utilize this pattern. What you want to do is invoke that static method that is a part of the factory, and then give it what you want to produce as the argument of that method. So how do you do that? Well, it's actually quite simple. Let's say you want to create a UFO. And we'll say var my UFO equals the name of the factory that produces that UFO. In this case, we call it aircraft factory. Hit dot. There's our static method. Remember, static methods are associated with the class name and not an instance of the class. And WebStorm is even telling you what the argument should be. And I want to create a UFO. When we run this, it should say UFO created. So let's go ahead and run this. And we have UFO created. So let's examine what's going on here. We have this variable reference my UFO. Now again, this is just an example. Yours is going to be a little bit more robust, your application. But we have a variable reference my UFO, and it equals what this method returns, the create aircraft method. So let's examine that method in our factory. So if the type equals jet, it's going to return a new jet. If the type or that argument that you supply is helicopter, then it returns a new helicopter, and so forth with the UFO. So we go back to the main, and we're saying this variable equals what this function returns, what the create aircraft returns. And again, the argument is UFO. So we go back there. Here's where it relates to UFO, and it returns a new UFO. So the factory is doing the actual instantiation, and then it returns that instance of that particular object to you. So let's go back to the main and create another aircraft. So I'll just copy and paste this code to simplify things, speed this up a little bit. And let's call it my jet. And jet. Make sure you spell it correctly. And run it again, and it should have another console log confirming that you created a jet. So let's try to create an aircraft that our aircraft factory has no idea how to create. So let's do something like a 747. So var my 747 equals aircraft factory dot create, and we'll just say 747. Let's see if you can create that. And we go ahead and run this. Now notice what happened. It didn't try to create a 747 because the factory doesn't know how. So what it did instead was return an error message and saying, I don't know how to create a 747. As of now, our aircraft factory can only instantiate 3 types of aircraft: a jet, a helicopter, and a UFO. And the purpose of this, it allows you to encapsulate all the instantiations of your classes. So it makes your code more readable and scalable. If you ever wanted to add different types of aircraft, you just go to the factory and put the code in the conditional here in your static method. So again, this is the simple factory creational design pattern.